Please welcome Chris Malone.
So here we are in the digital age of marketing. Welcome to the promised land, right? It's everything we always wanted as brand managers. We've got real-time customer behavior tracking with e-commerce. We've got measurable ROI with digital advertising. We can communicate literally with customers anytime, anywhere through mobile devices. What could be better, right? Well, why is it then, if we've got more data than ever before, more ways to communicate than ever before, why is it then that in just about any category you pick, customer loyalty is lower than ever before? But don't worry, there are vendors that can help us solve this problem. We've got our big data analytics, that's going to be the solution. Or customer experience management. Or my favorite, programmatic media buying. And every time we just about get our hand around it, it's a moving target and we can't get a hold of the next one. Well, I have some good news for you for a change. The real keys to loyalty are not a moving target. It's not anything new. It's been around forever. And it's something we can all take advantage of in every business that we're in, regardless of whether you're at a university, a hospital, a distributor, or a consumer products company. And by the time we're finished here this morning, you'll understand why it has the tremendous power not only to build loyalty, but help you generate consistent growth and profitability. But first, you'll need to understand where it comes from. And to bring that to life for you, I'd like to share the story of Mary Lou Dinalo. In December of 1982, Mary Lou Dinalo worked as a frame attendant for New Jersey Bell at their central switching office in Rochelle Park, New Jersey. The tools of her trade were a soldering iron and a telephone handset. This was back in the day when a new telephone line was connected. Someone actually had to solder a copper wire onto a frame and then test it to see if it worked. It wasn't glamorous work and it didn't pay very well, but it offered a pension and benefits. And for Mary Lou, that was important because she was a single mother struggling to support a teenage son and daughter. And as the holidays approached, Mary Lou started to think of ways that she could make Christmas a little bit more special for her kids. And so she decided to work some overtime hours at the training facility in Hackensack. Now, as it turns out, the training facility in Hackensack was not in a great area. In fact, one of her colleagues had been mugged walking down the alley to her car in the parking lot behind the building. But again, Mary Lou wanted to make the Christmas special, and so she set aside her fears, and after her shift in Rochelle Park, she headed for Hackensack. The first night was smooth sailing. She met new people, enjoyed the training material, and driving home, she even began to make a mental list of the gifts she might be able to afford if she just worked a few more hours. The second night, however, was entirely different. As she entered the alley, she noticed there were two men standing in the shadows at the other end. Now, this made her nervous, but she thought, maybe I'll just avoid eye contact and I'll get to my car as quickly as I can, the way I did the night before. About halfway down the alley, she noticed that the two men had entered it and were walking very quickly towards her. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt certain they were going to attack her. Her plan to avoid eye contact went right out the window. She became focused on their faces, trying to make out their shape and expression. And when the men reached about 10 feet away from her, she could feel a scream welling up from within inside her. But then her full-throttle brain recognized something familiar. But before she had a moment to think, the words, "Hi, Frank," came out of her mouth, and the two men stopped, dead in their tracks, startled by both the tone and content of her words. Now, Frank Passarella had been a pretty nice kid when he was younger. Mary Lou actually knew his mother, Jean. He'd gone to school with her son, Stephen. But in high school, he developed a drug habit. And after graduation, without a job, he began stealing to support that habit. He'd been arrested several times, and it got so bad, his parents actually had to put a deadbolt lock on their bedroom door so he wouldn't sell any more of their valuables. Now, Frank was stunned and embarrassed and managed to mutter the words, "Hi, Mrs. Dinalo," before he and his would-be partner in crime shuffled by. And Mary Lou made it to her car and drove home with her heart pounding in her chest all the way, feeling certain that if she'd not recognized Frank, it would have been the happy holiday she wanted for her kids. So how do we know this and what's become of Mary Lou? Well, in fact, Mary Lou Dinalo is my mother-in-law, and I've been hearing this story for 22 years, every year at Christmas. Every year the details get more vivid, if you think the way I tell it is crazy. But what is it about a story like this that we can all relate to? What is it about our psychology that allows us to navigate through threatening situations like this with very little information very quickly? Well, the answer actually lies deep in our past, because Mary Lou, like primitive humans tens of thousands of years ago, had to make two kinds of decisions very quickly and very accurately with very little information. First, she had to determine what were the intentions of those two men at the other end of the alley. Were they friends or foes? Going to help her or hurt her, give her something or take something from her? Or said another way, what degree of warmth could she pick up about their intentions? And then, given what she thought their intentions might be, she had to determine what was their ability to carry out those intentions. Were they fast or slow, strong or weak, foolish or intelligent, or what degree of competence did they have? And it turns out that in the original game of Survivor, tens of thousands of years ago, these were the most important decisions humans made every day. Not only when they interacted with strangers, but frankly in all of their interactions with people in their tribe or in their community, because it allowed them to know who they could trust, to form relationships, and stay in that tribe. That was a life and death matter, because unlike what we see on TV, if they got kicked out of the tribe, you didn't get to go to Redemption Island, right? You were pretty much dead within a few weeks because we're so dependent on one another for food, clothing, shelter, and protection. And so humans became hardwired through evolution to make these judgments instantly, almost without thinking, almost like we're breathing. We are constantly making these judgments about the intentions and ability of others towards us. And social psychologists have been able to show through research in over 40 countries that these basic warmth and competence perceptions are driving over 80% of human behavior in a social context. So let me explain how this works a little bit. You can think of warmth as a whole category of perceptions. It would include, is this person trustworthy? Are they honest? Do they listen to me? Do they care about me? Do they have my best interests in mind? Or are they only looking out for themselves? And you could think of all the other things that would fit into that category of intentions. Competence is all the things that you would expect: intelligence, resourcefulness, creativity, reliability, resources, knowledge, and all the things that go on there. And it turns out that these two perceptions actually lead to a predictable pattern of emotions, and it's actually these emotions that drive our behavior. So think for a moment about someone you know who's very warm, very friendly, very trustworthy, who's also really good at what they do. Well, typically this causes us to feel admiration and pride. We're drawn to these people. We become loyal to them. Now, if you flip that around, think of someone you know who has all that skill and ability, but is very cold and unapproachable, and you're not sure what their intentions are towards you. This often causes us to feel envy and distrust. We've got to be careful. We've kind of got to go along to get along, kind of grudging cooperation, but we're not sure we can really trust them if we turn our back. The other side of things, if we know someone who's really friendly and warm, and we generally trust them a great deal, but they're really not very reliable or trustworthy in terms of what they do from a competence standpoint, well, this causes us to feel pity and sympathy. And the behavior that comes from that is kind of indifference and neglect. They can't really help us, can't really hurt us, so we kind of become marginalized. And then the worst combination, of course, is if you're cold and incompetent. That just makes us angry, right? We feel contempt and rejection, and we avoid those people. And so it's this basic pattern of perceptions, emotions, that's guiding our behavior through all of our interactions. So let me give you an example to bring this to life for you. We can actually plot this in two quadrants with warmth on the vertical axis, competence on the horizontal. And if I were to pose the name to you, Tiger Woods, how many of you would say, raise your hand if you think Tiger Woods is very honest, trustworthy, warm, and friendly? Okay, now you can... No, nobody. Okay. Well, there's our standard for Tiger Woods. But if I were to ask you the other question, what about Tiger Woods? How many of you think he is very competent, capable, skilled, and effective at what he does? Yeah, most of us, right? So it's no surprise this is exactly how the U.S. adult population views Tiger Woods. He's very skilled, but not very trustworthy. We kind of grudgingly cooperate and tolerate him. Let me give you another name. What about Vice President Joe Biden? How many think he is very warm, friendly, honest, and trustworthy? Well, there's a few, more than Tiger Woods at least, right? But how many of you would say he is very competent, capable, skilled, and effective at what he does? Not really so much. So it won't surprise you, this is exactly how Joe Biden is seen by the adult population. Perhaps that's what happens with vice presidents, right? They're well-intentioned, but they can't really get anything done, so we ignore them. It won't surprise you that someone like Oprah Winfrey got a very warm, competent perception, very loyal following. And then someone, say, like Fidel Castro, this kind of very negative attitudes towards the U.S., running this banana republic in the Caribbean. We see him with contempt, and we reject him. And so every day we are making these judgments in all the interactions we have with one another on the basis of warmth and competence. And it turns out that we don't just do this with people. It turns out that we are wired as humans to interact with everything around us in this way. And so, for example, Dr. Fisk, my colleague, actually conducted research on how humans perceive different types of animals on the basis of warmth and competence. And it won't surprise you perhaps to know that our dogs and cats and horses that we love, we see as very warm and competent, and we admire and are loyal to them. The snakes and rats and lizards are down in low warmth and low competence. The lions and tigers and bears we see as very competent but not very trustworthy. But where you really don't want to be is where all the stuff we eat lives, which is the cows and the pigs and the lamb. And so the same perceptions of warmth and competence, we're projecting those onto animals. And in fact, there's research to show that actually computers and websites, we are judging the same way. Even though we don't have any contact with a human, we are wired to see everything through this lens of warmth and competence. And computers and websites as social actors has been shown, we kind of show courtesy and politeness and all of that to these computers as if they were human. So when I stumbled across this work in 2009, it occurred to me, if this is guiding our behavior in so many different ways, how could it not be impacting the way we conduct business, the way we choose who we buy from, and who we become loyal to? And so Dr. Susan Fisk and I, who is the world's renowned expert on warmth and competence at Princeton University, spent the last 3 years conducting research on over 45 companies and brands to ask their customers how they perceive them from a warmth and competence standpoint. And here's what we found. In the upper right-hand quadrant, we found Johnson & Johnson, Hershey's, Coca-Cola, lots of household brands and well-known nonprofits. They're seen with very strong warmth and competence. In the lower left-hand side, we found lots of banks and oil companies and insurance companies, all the companies you hear about every day. You're frustrated and held in contempt. In the lower right, we found actually luxury brands like Mercedes and Rolex and Rolls-Royce. And it's important to point out that this is how the total adult population views these brands. If there's an owner of a Mercedes, they may see Mercedes as warm and competent, but most people view that as a little bit out of reach, a little bit less approachable and not quite as warm. We weren't sure what we would see in the upper left-hand quadrant, but what we found actually is government-subsidized brands like Amtrak and the Postal Service and veterans hospitals are seen as well-intentioned but not very competent. Perhaps without the benefit of that government subsidy, they wouldn't continue to exist. So we saw this same pattern of warmth, competence, emotions, and behavior towards these companies and brands, just as we'd seen in everything else. And while that sounds interesting, the thing that was actually much more important and much more useful is that when we rolled up all of that data and compared those perceptions to people's loyalty and purchase intent, we found that over 50% of all purchase intent and loyalty that companies get from their customers can be explained by 4 basic human perceptions: warm, trustworthy, competent, and capable. Before we start talking about price, quality, reliability, features, benefits, or all the other stuff that we got trained to spend all of our time trying to communicate, the human aspects of these companies and brands were what was driving 50% of the behavior. So is it any wonder that despite we've got more data than ever before, perhaps we've been missing half the picture. Perhaps that is why we've got less loyalty than ever before. And I tell you, this hit me like a ton of bricks. I spent my entire career in the Procter & Gamble's, the Coca-Colas, and even Fortune 500s. And it caused me to think that perhaps 50% of everything that I'd been taught and trained about how to build a brand and build customer loyalty was either no longer true or may not have ever been true. And it caused me to step off the corporate ladder and say, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way for us to have customer loyalty and profitability and growth and all the things that we want. So I don't know about you, but I've spent my whole career in large companies, and it seems like every year there is some new book or theory or model of how the world works or doesn't work. And I've often wondered, they all are great, but how do we fit those all together? How do we make sense of all of that? How do we do all of that at once? If there was some common thread or rule of thumb that would guide us through most of what we needed to know, that would make it a lot easier. Well, for me, that's what warmth and competence has become. To me, it's become the underlying foundation, the psychology that helps explain why all of these ideas work. It's because of how we are wired to interact with one another as humans. And it's guiding so much of our behavior, whether we realize it or not. But let me give you a story to help bring this to life for you in the real world. In August of 2012, Teresa Cook lay dying in a hospital bed in Nashua, New Hampshire. By her side was her 21-year-old grandson, Brandon. She was in the final stages of pancreatic cancer, and Brandon was trying to do whatever he could to make her last days comfortable. And one of the most devastating things about pancreatic cancer is that it wreaks havoc on your digestive system. It takes away your appetite, causes rapid weight loss, exactly the time your body needs strength to fight the tumors. So Brandon was trying to get his grandmother to eat something. But she was refusing. She said, "This hospital food is awful. I want no part of it." But Brandon persisted, and she said, "Well, okay, maybe there is one thing. If you could get me my favorite food, I would give it a try." He said, "No problem, grandmother. What is that? I'll take care of it for you right away." She said, "I could really go for a bowl of clam chowder and a bread bowl from the Panera Bread shop." Brandon said, "I got that covered." He got on the phone, called the Panera Bread shop on Amherst Street in Asheville, New Hampshire, and said, "I'd like to pick up an order of clam chowder and a bread bowl this afternoon." And there was a pause in the line. And then he said, "I'm sorry, there's a problem. In the summer, we only make clam chowder on Friday. Can you come back on Friday?" He said, "No, you don't understand. My grandmother's very ill. If we don't get some food in her, she may not be with us on Friday." And so the manager got on the line, Susan Fortier. She said, "No problem. Come right over. We'll have it ready for you when you get here." And they did have it ready for him. And in addition, Susan had put together a box of cookies for him. She said, "There's no charge. You just let us know how your grandmother's doing. And if you need more clam chowder, we'll be here for you." And he did let her know, because Teresa Cook had more clam chowder on that Friday and the following Tuesday. And it wasn't until Saturday, August 18th, that Teresa Cook quietly passed away with her family by her side. The clam chowder had sustained her for maybe another week. It was just a bowl of clam chowder in just another week. But for Brandon and his grandmother, it was a matter of life and death, literally. One that they would never forget. And it turns out there are a lot of other people that will never forget either. Because on that first Tuesday, Brandon decided to send a little thank you note over the people at the Panera shop. And he sent that note on his Facebook page. And what do you imagine happened next? Nearly 800,000 people within a few days had liked that post. Nearly 35,000 around the world had posted comments. And many of them were Panera employees saying, "This is why I'm proud to work at Panera." Families saying, "This is why I'm taking my kids to Panera for dinner tonight." What counted for this incredible outpouring of emotion? Was it the quality of the clam chowder, the speed of the service, location of the store, the loyalty program, the digital marketing campaign? No, it wasn't any of those things. It was a genuine act of warmth and compassion towards another person, and we are wired by evolution to respond much more strongly to demonstrations of warmth and competence. Contrary to everything that we've been taught in our career, our success is not solely reliable on our competence, our skills, and our abilities. Actually, we are wired to respond much more to warmth because it was much more predictive of human survival and evolution. And we don't even have to think about it. We hear that story, it moves us, and we act. That's what this is going on. That's a demonstration of warmth in our environment. And so what we can take from this story, and frankly all the research that we've done, is that in fact people were the first brands, faces were the first logos, and all the branded trade and commerce we've been engaged in for the last several thousand years is just an adaptation of the way that we were wired by evolution to interact with one another. And so in fact we can say every human is a brand, and every brand is human. The way our brain processes and forms loyalty to them is exactly the same. And if you think about it, it makes sense. For most of human history, commerce between people was conducted face to face. That's where we picked up all of that warmth and competence information. Facial expressions, body language, words, actions, tone of voice. That's where we picked all of that information. Worked well for thousands of years, guided us through all of our interactions. And then about 150 years ago, a little something called the Industrial Revolution came along and changed all of that. Let's go back in time for a few minutes. Let's consider the cobbler back in the 1850s, who for thousands of years had made shoes by hand, literally for every person to the shape of each individual foot. He knew them by name, right down to the tips of their toes. And in those communities and those places where the cobbler made shoes, the relationship he had with his customer was really important. There was a lot of symbiotic interdependence. The customer needed the merchant as much as the merchant needed the customer. We didn't have credit cards or direct deposit or all the other things that we rely on today. People had to pay with barter and IOUs, unforeseen illnesses and weather events and so forth. And people had to stick together to survive. And so that relationship was really important. And if there was a problem, usually it got resolved pretty quickly. Because if the cobbler did wrong by the customer and didn't make it right, pretty much everyone in town would know about it by Sunday church. And he would come under pressure to make it right, or be run out of town and lose his livelihood. So there's a lot of balance in that relationship. Next, though, came the Industrial Revolution, mass production, mass communication, mass distribution. The shoes are made in a factory, put them on railroads, and ship them across the country. It was great benefits, tremendous cost reduction, availability, scale. Companies and brands became very large. And along the way, this notion of a direct relationship with the customer became really impractical. When Procter & Gamble made the soap in Cincinnati and shipped it across the country to San Francisco, they didn't have any direct contact with those customers anymore. That's where retailers and wholesalers and distributors came from. And if somebody had a bad experience with that soap in San Francisco, people in Cincinnati certainly weren't hearing about it. And so the social accountability that used to exist in small communities really went away. And the balance in that relationship went away. To where now, not only do we not see the people who make or sell us the shoes, we don't even see the shoes. We order them online and they show up in a box from Zappos. If we don't like them, we send them back. Along the way, you could say almost it's been the mass dehumanization of commerce between people. But now, after 150 years of what I would call the Middle Ages of marketing, something's changing. Due to e-commerce and social networks and mobile devices, we are being taken back to the future. There's a relationship renaissance underway where, again, we are making more of our decisions based on it as much about what we know about the people that we do business with as it is the product or service. That's really what the story about Brandon and his grandmother was all about. For the first time in 150 years, the whole world is now wired in the way that we were wired by evolution to react and respond to one another. It's not so much that if somebody has a good experience or a bad experience that everyone hears about it in town by the end of the week. It's everybody in the country can know about it by the end of the day. It's warmth and competence on steroids, turbocharged by this technology. And it's created the social accountability that hasn't existed for decades, is coming back with a vengeance. And large companies and brands are feeling it very, very harshly. Here's another story to bring it to life for you. In the summer of 2006, I learned for the first time that Starbucks' tremendous success is not due to the quality of its coffee, the location of its stores, or the speed of its service. At the time, I was Senior Vice President of Marketing at Aramark, a big food service company in Philadelphia. And Aramark was a licensee of Starbucks, operated 75 Starbucks stores on college campuses around the country. And the problem was that Aramark was about to lose their license because they weren't delivering the kind of customer experience that Starbucks demanded and was able to deliver at its own stores. And so in a last-ditch effort to preserve the relationship, a small team of executives from Aramark was invited to spend a few days in Seattle getting dipped in all the thought and process and insight that allowed them to deliver this great customer experience that they were known for. And so I was fortunate to be among the group that spent a few days in Seattle. And I expected to hear about how they selected their coffee beans and how they chose their store locations and how they designed the interior and how they managed the flow of service in the store. And we certainly heard a fair amount about that. But the thing that struck us most strongly, the thing that was the missing ingredient for Aramark, was the way that they recruited, managed, and motivated hourly employees. They told us about something called the Little Green Apron Book, which, as the name suggests, was a little green book that fit in the pocket of an apron. And inside that book, they talked about 5 ways of being, 5 ways that they wanted employees not only to demonstrate and serve customers, but even more importantly, ways of being that they wanted to demonstrate and serve each other. Things like being knowledgeable and genuine and concerned and involved. Inside that book, there were 5 cards, and they were business-sized cards. On the front was a little description of each way of being. On the back were just blank lines. And they were expected every day to catch each other in the act of doing something right. And then write a little compliment about that, and then present that card to their colleague. And what was surprising to us is that this was not just an idea that sat in a drawer on a shelf. They actually had a little apron on the wall in the back room and little pockets for each employee. And they'd collect 6 or 7 of these cards every day of catching each other, reinforcing, recognizing, and encouraging each other in these 5 ways of being. At the end of the month, these cards would be gathered up and sent to the district office and to the regional office, and they were written up into stories. Stories that were shared throughout the organization to recognize, encourage, and inspire their employees to treat everyone that they interacted with in these ways. And there was one story in particular that left a real impact on us. It was about a store on the West Coast that had a regular customer named Pete. Pete was an elderly gentleman who would come in a few times a week, have his coffee a certain way, read the paper for an hour or so, and then go home. Everybody knew Pete, welcomed him by name, and this went on for a few years. And then a few weeks went by, and Pete had not come in. And they started to ask each other, hey, has anybody seen Pete? Someone said, I think he has a daughter in LA. Maybe he's on vacation visiting his daughter. A few more weeks went by, still no Pete. And then one afternoon, a young woman came in. She said, does anyone here know a customer named Pete? And they said, sure, we know Pete. Where has he been? Is he on vacation? She said, no, I'm sorry, I'm Pete's daughter. And I'm sorry to say that my dad had a heart attack a few weeks ago and died. And I'm here in town going through his apartment to put his affairs in order. And I found something in his apartment that I was really confused by. In his apartment, I found 2 big bags. And in those bags were Starbucks cups. It said things like, have a nice day, come back soon, hope you feel better. And apparently, these were having a real impact on my dad's life. And I never knew that, and I just wanted to come down and thank you for the important impact you were having on my father. I never knew about it before. So what caused Pete to keep the cups? It wasn't the quality of the coffee, the speed of the service, the location of the store, or any of those things. It was these simple, genuine acts of goodwill towards another person. That's what we are responded to. That's what we're wired to respond to much more strongly. And many of these things, they cost us nothing. It's the simple little things. And the point is, sure, that was warm and that was competent, but that's not what we should be aiming for. What we should be aiming for is not loyalty, not customer service, not any of that. We should be aiming for making a lasting difference in the life of our customers. That's the top of the mountain. You get all of the loyalty, all of the growth, all of the financial results along with that, but making a lasting difference in the life of our customers, that is the peak that we should be aiming for. So whether we like it or not, whether we realize it or not, every day we are all being judged on the basis of our warmth and competence. And despite the remarkable gift we've all been given with the ability to accurately judge the intentions and abilities of others, we are equally cursed with blinders and an inability to see how we're coming across to others. Here's a story to give you an example. When the Great Recession hit in 2008, many companies went into survival mode, cutting costs, laying off employees, doing whatever they had to survive. One such company was a B2B supplier of industrial products to the healthcare industry in the Midwest. Like other companies, they cut costs and laid off employees. But being a public company, they went several steps further. In an effort to preserve as much shareholder value as possible, they raised prices on some of their products. They reduced customer service levels, increased the size of sales rep territories, and even canceled some unprofitable customer contracts. And as a result, despite that their revenue in 2009 went down by 25%, their profits went down by only 15%. And as you might expect, Wall Street was elated, held this company out as a model of financial discipline and shareholder value maximization. Their stock price went up to nearly a pre-recession high. But unfortunately, the adulation was short-lived. By early 2010, the company's revenue had started to fall, and a new CEO was brought in to turn things around. And the first question he asked, he said, I can see that we've lost revenue thanks to the recession, but why is it in the years prior to that we lost $1 billion in revenue to customers to competitors? Why did we lose those accounts? And no one could give him a satisfactory answer, and so he called our firm to help get to the bottom of the situation. We came in and sat down and started to talk to accounts that they had recently won, lost, retained, or unsuccessfully bid, both the customers and the account managers that had handled those, and asked them how they perceived this organization from a warmth and competence standpoint and what had happened and why. And this was a company that was very proud of their reputation, were seen as a leader in their industry, but there's no way to put it other than to say that the feedback was brutal. Customers said things like, we did business with this company for decades and they abandoned us in our time of greatest need. Employees had said, I was laid off by telephone to get me off of the payroll as quickly as possible with not so much as a thank you. In fact, even one recently won customer, the best that they could say is not only do they have a major customer retention problem, they've got a major employee engagement problem. This company was no longer seen as the most trusted and respected in their industry. The best that customers could muster for them is they do okay for a faceless monolith. That's what they had become, a faceless monolith. And we brought this message back to the management team. And initially, they couldn't believe it. They said, you've got to be wrong. You've got to do more interviews, do more analysis. You don't understand. We're the most respected in our company, in our industry. We did that, and the answer became more and more refutable. All they had done to preserve that shareholder value was lost thousands of customers, hundreds of employees, $1 billion in accounts to competitors, and a reputation that had taken them decades to build. How could they have missed this? They said, what did we do wrong? We just did what Wall Street asked us to do. We just did what other companies were doing. The point was the message they were sending to their customers and employees is that all they cared about was the bottom line. They could not be trusted to look out for the best interests of customers and employees, and as a result, they could not be trusted to handle their account. It's a huge blind spot. An awful lot of what we've been taught and trained in our career is fundamentally at odds with what it takes for people to trust one another. A lot of the things that we've taken for granted, whether they were price increases or policies or return policies or you name it, have sent the message to our customers that we can't be trusted. And we're being held accountable in a way like never before, whether it's a bad employer experience or a bad customer experience. And so if you're interested in building a brand that has lasting customer loyalty, consistent growth, and profitability, I can boil it down for you to 3 imperatives. First and foremost, we're going to have to become a lot more aware of how our policies, practices, and processes are coming across to our customers from a warmth and competence standpoint. The reason there's so little loyalty is because there's so little trust, and there's so little trust is because we send the message with everything that we do that we just want to get that transaction as quickly as possible, get a return right away, grow as fast as we can, and we often are doing it at the expense of our customers and employees. Once we've got that feedback, we're going to have to be willing to do things differently. We've got to embrace significant change those policies, practices, and processes to better align them with the expectations of customers. And finally, at the root of it is really, what are our priorities? If our goal is simply to maximize growth or maximize shareholder value, it turns out that's not an aspiration that's worthy of very much loyalty from customers and employees if it comes at their expense. Shareholders certainly deserve a fair return, but it can't be sustained when we're doing it at the expense of other important stakeholders. We have yet to see a company that delivered great customer loyalty and growth that wasn't also doing the same thing for their employees. The two are inextricably linked. Here's a story of a company that did just this. Back in 2008, when the recession hit, Domino's Pizza was already in trouble. They'd had 2 consecutive years of negative same-store sales growth. And so when the recession hit and people cut back on discretionary spending, Domino's and their franchisees were especially hard hit. And they knew that in addition to the recession, they were also facing a lot of competition, not only from Papa John's and Pizza Hut, but lots of other high-quality frozen pizza had entered the supermarket. And Domino's had been slow to adapt and change. They knew they had a problem with their product, and it really caused some soul-searching internally. So they sat down and conducted focus groups and research with their customers and asked them what they needed to do differently. And as with the other story I told you, the feedback was pretty negative, pretty brutal. Customers said, your pizza tastes like cardboard and is totally devoid of flavor. But that was just a half of it. The other half of it was, they said, it's clear that Domino's doesn't care about their customers. They've been doing this for a long time. It never gets any better, and that is what was most insulting. So this was hard news to swallow, and they knew that they had a problem with their product. And they spent the next 2 years developing an entirely new pizza recipe from scratch. And they tested it and found it was much more preferred over not only their current pizza, but a competitor's pizza. And they were getting ready to launch it, but they still had this nagging concern. We've changed our pizza, but how are we going to overcome the contempt and cynicism and distrust that customers have for us? It was at that point that the folks at Domino's became inspired to do something totally unthinkable from a business standpoint, but totally natural from a human standpoint. In the fall of 2009, during the NFL playoffs, Domino's CEO, Patrick Doyle, went on national television and apologized for the poor quality of their pizza and the poor quality of their service. And he pledged that they were going to do things differently. Not only had they changed their pizza, but they had had a change of heart. And they were going to hold themselves accountable. He was personally putting a face on that company and brought their development chefs out from behind the camera in these unscripted, very natural discussions where they poked fun at themselves and promised to do better and asked America to give them another chance. And what did America do in response? They did give them another chance. Because in early 2010, Domino's same-store sales rocketed to over 10%. They finished 2010 with the highest same-store sales growth, not only in the history of the company, but in the history of the industry. And over the last 4 years, Domino's continued to exceed the entire category in growth. They didn't cut costs. They didn't lay off employees. They didn't focus on shareholder value. They focused on giving the customer what they wanted, apologizing and demonstrating warmth and vulnerability and humanity in their marketing. And what happened along the way? Well, shareholders only got a 350% return. Their stock price went from $23 to about $75 where it is today. So by focusing on the best interests of the customer and employees, shareholders actually got more, not less. And that's where we've got to kind of reverse our priorities. We've got to recognize that maximizing shareholder value comes when we deliver what we need to customers. It's customers and employees that will deliver what we need for shareholders. So I hope the moral of these stories is clear. In an age where our reputation and our brand can be won or lost in a single day with a click of a mouse, perhaps our greatest asset is our ability to demonstrate warmth and competence to our customers. And it makes sense in any human endeavor, whether personal, professional, or commercial. Our success has always depended on the cooperation and loyalty of others. And so the notion of keeping our own best interests in balance with those of others, it doesn't require us to recklessly disregard our best interests, but rather keep them in balance. It's a form of enlightened self-interest. And so I challenge you, whatever industry you are in, do not let your brand, do not let your company, do not let your business become just another faceless monolith. There are remarkable human brands in all of your organizations if you will simply bring them forward and embrace the psychology that evolution wired us to respond to. Not only will you make a difference in your business, but more importantly, you can make a difference in the lives of your customers, clients, and employees. And so if you found these insights and stories helpful, I encourage you not to leave them here. Take them home with you. Quick email will get you a copy of the slides and all the resources I've referenced today, some videos, some white papers, and all of the kinds of things that you might want to read up on, those academic papers and so forth. And so from here, I'll leave it to you. Take it home, make a difference. Thanks very much.